Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we turn to finally talking about the long-anticipated final chapter in the first trilogy of Star Wars movies made by Disney called The Rise of Skywalker. And I hate to break it to you guys, but as suspected, things did not end well for this Skywalker saga. Admittedly, Disney had a tough road to travel to even get here though, and they certainly did their best trying to make things entertaining and fun, but in the end, it turned out to be a mediocre offering at best. This is putting it as kindly as possible, of course, too. I just wanted to first start things off today by admitting that I had fun watching most of these movies for the most part, but looking back on them more closely and they fall apart really quick. Probably not nearly as bad as the Star Wars prequel films, particularly Episode 1 The Phantom Menace standing out as the most confusing and off-putting of all, but the Disney trilogy sure gives the prequels a run for their money in the being shitty department. So while I'm still a fan and I'm happy to see someone is at least trying to keep this series going, but there are a lot of things that Disney can and should be doing better. So without further ado, here's my reasons why Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker failed. Namely, right out the gate, the most awful and glaring offense here is that you can really tell Disney didn't plan this whole trilogy out. They launched it as fast as they could, churning out The Force Awakens in 2015 immediately after acquiring the Star Wars rights from George Lucas. But much like the scientists in another series that was soft rebooted in 2015, Jurassic Park scientists are actually very similar to Disney's filmmakers behind the new Star Wars movies. Both groups had gotten hold of virtual magic in a bottle, like the dinosaur cloning science in the Jurassic films and the Star Wars name and brand which Disney bought. But instead of taking their time and planning things out carefully and trying to make a more long-term, quality-focused approach, both the Jurassic Park scientists and Disney's producers, they rushed to monetize their new findings and holdings immediately, seeking short-term gains over longevity and quality-focused ones. And much like the disastrous endings of Jurassic Park and Jurassic World, this Disney Star Wars trilogy is turning into a big mess too. The first movie was decent, but the second totally threw things off. And now they're trying to retcon and save things with this third and final movie in the trilogy, but the hole they dug is just way too deep to get out of. And their efforts are failing critically and creatively, despite probably still being highly profitable. Next, let's talk more about The Rise of Skywalker being just mediocre, similar to The Force Awakens, which is fitting since J.J. Abrams directed both of them. The middle movie, The Last Jedi, was by Rian Johnson, and that was the one that was an obvious and total mess, which shit on the fans and infused leftist propaganda themes like feminism and girl power into it and more. But now at least we are past that film, but living in the wake of it isn't helping this new one. As for the mediocreness, more specifically, it's actually a little more complex and hard to explain than you might think, which is ironic because these movies don't get very complex at all anymore. They get convoluted and out there, but the stories are pretty bland, derivative, and just plain unoriginal. But specifically for this Rise of Skywalker film, the way that it's mediocre is that while it looks great physically and the film and sets and effects are all well done and highly serviceable and look good to the eye, but it's all for naught since we don't care so much about the story or the characters at all. It's kind of like watching fireworks. While they're fun and cool and can look great a few times a year, especially with the right effects, there's really not much to them and there's nothing supporting them like a good plot or interesting personalities, and so on. But at the very least, fireworks shows end after 15 or 20 minutes or so. But watching a new Star Wars movie is like watching fireworks for almost 3 hours. Sure, it's good at first, but it drags on far too long, and it feels even longer than it actually is, while also overstaying its welcome, and by the end, you just kind of feel numb and disappointed. Another major problem with The Rise of Skywalker and the Disney trilogy at large was the overuse and focus on fan service, and always bringing back old characters, film imagery, and even retreading the plots of the previous films directly. The Force Awakens was the worst offender of this, of course, it being basically a soft reboot of A New Hope, the very first Star Wars film. The Last Jedi at least tried to do something different, but at the same time, Rian Johnson failed too because instead of doing something new and different and a proper tangent, what he instead did was just try and do the opposite every chance he could get, subverting our expectations as he put it, which ended up coming off as childish and rude and disrespectful at best. But with this new movie, Rise of Skywalker wasn't exactly another soft reboot like what J.J. Abrams did before, but it did retread a lot of similar things that were in its spiritual predecessor, The Return of the Jedi film, which was the third film in the original trilogy, of course. Both Jedi and Skywalker end with giant space battles too, and many ships flying all over the place, while also our main character battles the Emperor. In addition, both films have similar celebration scenes at their ends too, but that's about it for retreading of the plot. So while Rise of Skywalker Skywalker isn't as derivative as the Force Awakens plot, they do still reuse a lot of stuff, and it kind of feels like they were afraid to do anything new. And as mentioned, what's been teased in the trailers, I think we all know by now that Emperor Palpatine returns for this film. So rather than developing a new villain or some kind of other original threat, Rise of Skywalker just brings back the Emperor out of nowhere in what looks like a desperate attempt to try and win back the fans who felt betrayed by The Last Jedi. There was much more fan service than that too, like for example, bringing back all of the original cast members. Mild spoilers, but you all probably saw this coming anyway. Many talked about how Lando Calrissian was returning already, and Princess Leia was bound to come back since she was heavily featured in the last film. But since her actress died, rest in peace Carrie Fisher by the way, but well, I guess her family and estate still needed some money, so they squeezed her into this movie by using old footage and outtakes and computer graphics. It was painstakingly obvious they did this though. We could tell the actor wasn't there, and every time we saw Leia in the new movie, it was definitely pretty cringe. And then the next move is even more egregious. Instead of letting dead characters rest in peace, Jar Jar Abrams decided to bring back Luke Skywalker and Han Solo too, because of course he did. Now, Luke returning actually makes some sense since the Jedi have been known to return from the dead as Force ghosts before, but Han Solo coming back as like a dream or a memory or whatever, that was really cheap. Then there's tons of other supporting characters returning too, like Chewbacca of course. And there's a few pilots from the Return of the Jedi thrown in there at the end too. All of it a bit much to say the least, and looking rather desperate at worst. And let's not forget, the Emperor also comes back here too, as I just said. And even there's one quick scene where we hear every Jedi from the previous movies speak to Rey briefly too. And while I thought it sounded kind of cool in the moment, but putting it all together with all these other callbacks and fan service, well, it makes it seem much worse. JJ was exploiting the old films and using their themes and characters and iconography to try and make this movie seem more relevant. While we're talking about characters here, and since we already went over most of the old ones that all come back, let's now talk about the new cast and how they really duffed up their stories in Rise of the Skywalker. First of all, Finn, the black guy, well, it really doesn't get any more token than this. Finn basically does nothing in this movie, once again, and I'm still scratching my head here trying to figure out why this guy is even in these films. Other than giving Disney a diversity checkmark on their multiculturalism checklist, I really don't get it. Finn started off pretty interesting here too, him being a stormtrooper who defects to the good guys in the Resistance, but then in the last two movies he just runs around pointlessly. Sure, he's chasing some different MacGuffin each and every time here and there, but in the end he does very little and is just a waste of time and space in an already overcrowded and overly long film and series. In addition, Finn always seems to be the one goofing around and putting in his awkward brand of repackaged Marvel-esque comedy in these things. That just doesn't work in Star Wars as well at all. Overuse of comedy was another fault in this film, albeit a smaller one, but combine Finn's failed comedy with him not needing to be there and not doing anything, and I think you could see why he helped bring Rise of Skywalker down a bit. Next, there's the Poe Dameron character, who has many of the same flaws Finn has too, but at the very least, Poe is the designated pilot, who also takes over as a leader of the Resistance at one point. So there is that, but then they also try to squeeze in this love interest and side plot for Poe in Rise of Skywalker that just doesn't work for me either. And while I appreciate Kerry Russell playing his love interest and her performance is fine and dandy, I just don't think it was needed or worked with this story well at all. It didn't fit in. And also, Poe's love interest was one of the many extra side characters squeezed into this movie, which appear to be done just so they can sell toys and merchandise afterwards. There was this girl, Poe's new girlfriend, and a random new droid with a little wheel on it, and then there's this little alien guy who was a hacker or mechanic or something. They're all just there to be made into toys later. Could have combined all of these money-grabbing characters into one new and interesting one, but instead, they spread them out to try and sell more toys afterwards. And that's pretty shallow, and it takes away from the film. Finally, we need to talk about the two main characters. And since they go hand in hand and it's hard to tell who's the actual single main character, let's just go over Rey and Kylo Ren together. Both of these characters become incredibly overpowered by this movie's end, almost to comical degrees. At one point, Rey reveals she can heal people with the Force now, which pretty much comes out of nowhere too. And then later, Rey and Kylo heal each other, saving each other from dying. And this brings up two more problems with the film and its plot. First, there's just so many very convenient things like this happening throughout the whole picture. Rey conveniently has these new powers, then there's things like Kylo's ship crashing and him coming out completely unscathed. Convenient stuff happens a lot here, and it gets very annoying. And it just makes me feel like the movie makers just wanted to get this film over with and the trilogy done too, because anytime there's plot conveniences like this all over the place. You could tell someone's getting lazy. Next, let's talk about a number of big moments that are immediately reversed upon, because the movie didn't have the balls to stand behind any bold decisions. First, there's a point where Rey stabs Kylo Ren in a fight, seemingly killing him, but then she immediately force heals the guy to bring him back. Another fake out death happens when a ship blows up and the heroes get really sad because they think Chewbacca died on it. We quickly find out Chewie was on a different ship though, which really deflates the film's tension. Lastly, there's a sequence where the droid C-3PO loses his memory. He even has a heartfelt goodbye before it happens, but then about 15 minutes later and R2-D2 fixes his memory and everything's back to normal. Combine that with things like bringing back Emperor Palpatine even though he died in Return of the Jedi, and well, it's really starting to seem like there's no real stakes in this Star Wars universe. Anyone could die and come back willy-nilly now, which really sucks the life and tension and excitement out of this whole movie. Another one I forgot to mention was Poe's love interest seems to die when they blow her planet up, but she later comes back out of nowhere just because I guess J.J. Abrams didn't want anyone important to die here. In the end, that's about the gist of why The Rise of Skywalker failed according to me. At least that's as far as I could say safely without getting too far into the spoilers and spelling out each and everything. Sure, you can still watch this movie and even it's probably lots of fun for many people, but for me, I left the theater with a big maybe in my mind. And then slowly over time, it's becoming apparent how awful and cheap and exploitative and forgettable this whole new trilogy has become. I do hope we get more Star Wars films in the future though, I'm sure we will, but perhaps Disney could learn their lesson and make something really great one day instead. Surely their spin-off show The Mandalorian on Disney Plus is showing lots of promise. We'll see how it ends next week. So even if we just get more shows like that one and more games like Jedi Fallen Order, which was another good move by Star Wars and Disney this year, well, if the future of the series looks more like that, we could be fine or even great. But as for The Rise of Skywalker, it obviously just looked like this movie was a reaction to The Last Jedi flopping, and it was Disney trying to desperately win back the fans with more callbacks and hollow fan service. But now that it's over, maybe we'll move on to bigger and better things one day. But for now, the future of Star Wars is certainly looking pretty bleak, and it could even get worse if that's actually possible. What do you guys think? Did you see The Rise of Skywalker? What are your thoughts on the Star Wars films? Did I miss any reasons or bad parts and why this movie failed? If so, please comment all of your thoughts below this video. And also press like if you enjoyed what you saw today. And until next time, may the Force be with you guys. Always.